It is a national tragedy, a horrifying political assassination, the latest evidence of a country dangerously awash in targeted violence. The murder of Charlie Kirk, the charismatic leader of Turning Point USA, the most influential conservative activist in the country, has shaken everyone, regardless of political persuasion, in the wake of the 2 attempts to kill Donald Trump last year. Just before the bullet was fired at the 31-year-old Kirk at Utah Valley University, the subject was shootings.
Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
The president, in a White House video, says he's angry.
It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year.
But as Democrats joined in denouncing the murder, MSNBC senior political analyst Matthew Dowd attacked Kirk.
He's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
MSNBC President Rebecca Cutler apologized. Matthew Dowd made comments that were inappropriate, insensitive, and unacceptable. We apologize for his statements, as has he. There is no place for violence in America, political or otherwise. And then she fired him. Elon Musk immediately engaged in guilt by association. The left is the party of murder.
Does there need to be more shame introduced into American cultural life? Does there need to be fewer silos where people are only talking to people who only agree with them?
I think I disagreed with him on just about every policy question. But until the end of time, every last one of us should defend his right to safely and securely, on any campus in the United States of America or anywhere, advocate that which he believed in politically.
Charlie wasn't president. He wasn't even a politician. He was a young political star defending American freedoms, especially the freedom of speech. And if guys like Charlie are targets for assassination, we all are.
Kirk was close friends with some at Fox News. In fact, he co-hosted Fox and Friends Weekend in July.
The tables have completely flipped over the last decade, and it goes to show that this patriotic revival is being led by the youngest Americans.
I knew him as a teenager and watched him become a grown man with 2 beautiful children, his wife, and he died doing a very American thing, a First Amendment thing. He was a uniter, not a divider.
Brett, you came into my office about, 20 minutes ago, and I was bawling, and so many of us are just beyond devastated, as I know you are.
And then, while the president was on the couch at Fox and Friends, he broke the news.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job. Essentially, somebody that was very close to him turned him in.
I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Sarah Bedford, investigations editor at the Washington Examiner. And in Connecticut, Charlie Gasparino, senior correspondent at Fox Business Network. Sarah, whether you like Charlie Kirk or not, this is an absolute national tragedy, as I said. And I had never mentioned the names of these people because they crave attention and I don't want to give it to them. But do you think the media, some in the media, are politicizing this by blaming the left or liberal lunatics for the actions of someone who's obviously insane?
No, I don't think so. I think all available evidence related to the suspect suggests that this was a person who was radicalized by a leftist ideology. Every piece of evidence that authorities have released. If the media is going to have an honest conversation about radicalization, where it's happening, how it's happening, and who it's happening to, it has to be acknowledged that extremism isn't necessarily evenly distributed across the political spectrum, and that the left does have a radicalization problem that has not been spoken about proportionally in the media as the extremism on the right, and it does exist. There is violent extremism on both sides. It is not proportionate. And in order to have an honest conversation about what led to this moment, that has to focus in part on the left.
I'm glad you mentioned that it's not unique to one side or one party. Charlie Kirk was not a saint. He said 2 years ago, it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so we can have the Second Amendment. But his murder makes us feel like a very dangerous time.
I mean, we are, obviously, and we've had dangerous times in the past. I was a kid, but, you know, I remember when RFK got shot, and I remember Martin Luther King. I don't remember JFK, but it wasn't that far behind. We've had political violence for many years. It's on both sides. But let's be really clear here, and this is where I think this becomes a media story, Howie, perfect for you, as a matter of fact, is that if you look at the preamble of what the MSNBC president said before she fired Matthew Dowd, she said inappropriate, this, that, and the other thing. She didn't say inaccurate. And I think what we have to come to terms with here, and it's scary, is that it is mainstream progressive thought that what people like Charlie Kirk basically stand for. I mean, I don't know that statement that you made, but I know the guy. I know what he generally says, and I've conversed with him in the past. He's, I actually once got a little bit of a thing with him over him inviting him jousting with or debating or discussing with Gavin Newsom politics. Yeah, and he invited me on the show to talk about it. That's the type of guy he was, and he's pretty mainstream, Charlie Kirk. Yet it is common thought, accepted as common knowledge in progressive circles, particularly in the progressive media, that he is a fringe character who is hateful and divisive and everything else.
Right. The important thing there about the timing is we had just learned that he had died from the wound, and here he's being trashed, which is not to say, he or anybody has a perfect record. There are sickos online right now who are celebrating the fact that he was killed. I find that infuriating. I find that just inhumane. And Sarah, I hate the blame game. I really do. Bill Clinton blamed Rush Limbaugh for the Oklahoma City bombing. New York Times blamed Sarah Palin for having a map with crosshairs. None of this was true. That was with the Gabby Gifford shooting. The guy who badly wounded Steve Scalise at a Republican baseball practice was a Rachel Maddow viewer. Is there too much finger pointing? I get your earlier point about we've got to be honest about motivations and so forth. But my feeling is always like, who cares about their motivations? Anybody who would do this or shoot up a classroom full of young children is obviously mentally diseased.
Of course, this was an unbalanced individual, right? But the motivations here are hugely, hugely important to understanding what happened and, more importantly, preventing it from happening again. If this is going to be put in the category with all other mass shootings in history, an assassination attempt on a president for someone who was trying to get the attention of a movie star, right? Mental illness was at the heart of that. This is different. We know that in this case, this person, all available evidence suggests this person was radicalized by an ideology that on the left is becoming increasingly mainstream. We have a Democratic left that has embraced rhetoric that suggests Donald Trump is Hitler. His followers are Nazis, and they need to be stopped by any means necessary. That is not constrained to 4chan and Reddit. That is something that Democratic leaders are saying out loud. It's creating the conditions for radicalization of a growing number of people on the left, and any honest conversation needs to acknowledge that.
Well, Elon Musk tweeted 100%. Yesterday, Charlie, that we either fight back or they will kill us. To me, the idea that like anybody who's liberal, anybody who's progressive bears some sort of collective guilt here is what bothered me. And I should mention that the Wall Street Journal is taking some heat for having reported that on the bullet casings, there was writing. One of them said, hey, fascists. But the idea that there was any transgender writing on the bullet casings, although Fox News Digital has reported that his roommate is a transgender person. So Kirk went out there. It's the American thing. He wanted to debate. He would debate anyone. He would debate Charlie Gasparino. Since his schedule was well publicized, he must have known he was taking some risk.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we can bring a security expert on and why
Yeah.
there wasn't drones flying over the place, before, and why they didn't take extra measures when, in Butler. I mean, obviously, there needs to be. There's a whole other story here about how to ramp up security. But I want to just follow up on one thing, Howie. In mainstream Republican circles, which I know a lot about, and I know a lot about the Democratic circles. I'm kind of like some guy that's floating around in the middle usually. In the Republican circles, they do not embrace the rhetoric of the far right. I mean, it's when Donald Trump did whatever he did on January 6th, there were plenty of Republicans that said unacceptable. As a matter of fact, the Republican establishment said that. Now let's contrast that to what the Democratic establishment has said about Trump, about the MAGA movement in general, and maybe the 2020 riots. I mean, they all but accepted that as normal behavior. The opposition to Trump was called the resistance, and it was stated on TV, mainstream, outlets like CNN and MSNBC. The resistance was against Hitler during World War II. Everybody knows that. So remember, the demonization of MAGAism, of Republicans as Nazis, has been going on for a long time. I'm not saying that's exactly what's caused this, but you gotta take that into account. Mainstream Republicans, I mean, it's so inaccurate and so historically ahistorical and so sickening to compare what Donald Trump is doing in office to Hitler. Yet it is done all the time by progressives, and they do it in all these cultural settings, including the university, including the mainstream media.
Let me jump in. So Utah Governor Spencer Cox has been making the TV rounds and calling for a lowering of the temperature. But here's the president when he was on Fox and Friends on Friday, having this to say.
Radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious and they're horrible and they're politically savvy. Although they want men and women sports, they want transgender for everyone, they want open borders.
Sarah, as you know, there are people who say that President Trump blames the other side, and that he doesn't try to bring the country together even in a moment like this.
Well, again, I go back to the point where it is unity the right kind of conversation to be having right now. Obviously, people need to chill out.
Stopping the violence
is very important. That's also part of Donald Trump's message. But to what Charlie said, I mean, the media in particular as well has played the guilt by association game with Republicans for a decade now, that every Republican has been made to answer for what we see happening on the far right. For January 6th, for example, the media does not hold Democrats to account for engaging in rhetoric that mirrors what the far left is saying and creating the conditions for this.
Are we not seeing the opposite right now with people like Musk?
Well, but we don't see the media holding Democrats accountable for the rhetoric that's increasingly infiltrating the party's mainstream.
You know, you have the murder, Charlie, of the United Healthcare CEO. The shooter was inexplicably makes me angry, called a hero. You have the two Israeli embassy staff members who were killed for that reason. You had someone trying to burn down the Pennsylvania governor's mansion with Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro. Doesn't it feel like doesn't it feel like we're inching closer to a state of open warfare?
God, I don't want to overstate this because I'm old enough, as I said, to remember the '60s, where cops were getting shot by the prior version of Antifa, and when political assassinations occurred, it felt like almost every other day, and everybody from George Wallace to Robert F. Kennedy.
There's a history here. There's a history here.
There's a history here, but it does feel like we're in one of these moments here where the media has to step up and maybe cover this as something that's different. But what's really sort of unique about this, it
just briefly,
this almost feels like. Listen, I'm not saying there aren't kooks on the right, and there obviously are, and they act out, and we have to be vigilant against this. But I think the fact that the progressives that rule our cultural institutions have for so long ignored what was brewing right in the surface, what was acceptable in mainstream Democratic progressive circles.
And that's a
that
fair
this-
point. I just want to mention
this
before we
is
have
an outcome of that. I mean, they
Okay.
haven't stepped up to the plate.
Charlie's wife, Erica, said on his podcast, if we can put that up, that she's going to continue to build Turning Point USA. No one will ever forget my husband's name. I will make sure of it.
Hi.